Say I'm expecting X amount of people, and they'll hook you up with something.
Cool. Hey everyone, I'm here with Chris CReality in our hometown around Elizabeth, New Jersey. Chris and I go way back. I've been following him, just digging his music. That's one of the things that I believe really connects us all, is the respect and admiration of what your fellow music lover DJs doing, as far as sticking in that lane of music that it's not what everybody else is doing or playing. I think Chris, you've always given that to me, as a DJ back from the late 80s, early 90s, you've always stuck to a different sound. You always wanted to introduce different music. So thank you for being here with me today, and I hope,
appreciate the invite. This is great.
Yeah, I hope that we touch on some topics, because I see a lot of your posts on social media. We talk about just certain things that seem to be happening in both sides of the music, right? It seems to happen in the dance music side and also in the hip hop side. Yeah,
it's very similar. A lot of similar dynamics.
Yeah. So, just before we start, for those who do not know of you or tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into this road of music and DJing and hip hop.
No problem. DJ CReality, I've been DJing, I don't know, over 30 years now. I couldn't give an exact start date, but myself, like a lot of the other hip hop DJs, kind of came along the same. A lot of us from our era and my age group kind of came along the same route. Was listening to guys like Red Alert and Marley and all these kind of guys, and stations like WHBI, and it was just this, growing up in a tri-state, New York, New Jersey area, it was something that was just so fascinating and new to us at the time. So it was just, I just became obsessed with it, you know what I mean? And then I think the definitive moment for me as a hip hop DJ, which is the moment for a lot of other people, was Herbie Hancock's Rocket. And hearing the scratches in a song like that applied the way it was applied, with an artist that wasn't really known, that was more of a jazz guy, but had always been kind of experimental. And hearing the sound, you got to remember, at that time there was no visual reference points. So when you heard things, you just had to try to decipher what they were. It isn't like now where you can watch all kinds of tutorials and all these, have all this visual reference. So that, it just fascinated me. And then years later, I got involved during the quote unquote golden era, I guess you could call it. I was a part of a group called My Crooks back in the 90s. We were heavily involved in the 90s indie hip hop scene that kind of started as an answer to the explosion of mainstream hip hop. We were like the total opposite. We were like the counterculture, I guess you could say. Then I did radio at WBAI, and the legendary, shouts to Jay Smooth, Underground Railroad radio show. We were the longest running hip hop show in New York. Doesn't get mentioned enough. Prime time, Saturday nights, 10 o'clock, 10 to 12. We had so many great DJs that also were part of the show. Hamsky, Monk One, Spinna, AV, rest in peace to G-Man. A lot of guys came, through that show. And, in gigs and all that kind of stuff, and just trying to, like you said, share music with people, and I mean, that's what it's really all about, right?
Yeah. So let me stop you a little bit there, because you kind of,
you
spilled a lot.
I'm a good rambler.
But so, before listening to Rocket, Herbie Hancock, did you know what scratching hip hop? Did you know anything about what was happening in that side of the world?
I had seen, people at like block parties, and I had an ex-girlfriend whose older brother was a DJ, and he had equipment set up in the house, and it was very fascinating to me to see that. So I had an understanding, I had an idea that that's where that sound was coming from, and that's what was making that sound. And then obviously when the video came out, the crazy video, you remember the Rocket video? Then you kind of put two and two together, because it was done in a more musical kind of a way. In that song, it wasn't just a way to transition from one song to the next, or it was more, it had a lot of musicality to it, and that's what drew me, to that. And then eventually, years later, I wound up applying that same kind of technique, because I worked with a couple different live bands.
I remember that.
So so that it was a way for me to apply that scratching technique and the hip hop element, but with live musicians. So
So were you going out during that time?
Oh yeah, I was everywhere, man. I was way underage, being in places that I shouldn't have been. You know, I just couldn't get enough of it though.
And this is strictly hip hop music, or were you
mainly hip hop, because that was always like my core interest. But again, like, you know, hip hop is music that's based on other music, and it comes from a lot of other music. You know, all the like classic break beats and all that kind of stuff. So we were never really closed-minded,
right?
Because we made the connection.
Yeah.
It wasn't until years later when the music kind of got put in a box. Because, you know, when you have to sell something, you have to compartmentalize it. But we came from a different time, because DJs like guys like Bambaataa and Flash and Herc, I mean, you know, they were playing these records from all over the world that were all, you know, so many different kinds of music. I even went to the Garage closing year.
Well, you did.
Yeah.
Now, for a hip hop guy attending something like the Paradise Garage, which is more dance oriented, what was that experience for you?
It was very different. I was extremely young at the time. I was like 15 years old. A neighbor actually dated Larry Levan at the time.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, so,
oh wow, look at this! I never knew that.
So you know, you had to be a member. So he actually offered a couple of us from the neighborhood if we wanted to go check it out. And I think it was like the closing year, 87.
87, September.
Yeah, it was like 15 or 16 at the time, and it was. Listen, man, like anything. Obviously, the atmosphere was a little bit different than what we were used to. We knew who we were going with, so we knew kind of what to expect. That we knew that this wasn't our typical hip hop kind of a thing, but we didn't care because music trumped everything else. You know, years later, you know, unfortunately now music has kind of become like sonic wallpaper. It's just something that's kind of necessary in a venue. But back then, it was the focus. You know, it wasn't who's there and what they were wearing. It was all about the music, and the music was great. Larry played all kinds of stuff.
That's a point that I want to get back to. But so going into such a huge venue like the Paradise Garage, and maybe not experiencing something to that level, but like, did you know at that moment when you stepped in, oh my God, look, like, listen to the sound, did all that, like, because now everybody refers to the Paradise Garage as, you know, the it, right?
The place, right?
The place, sonically, you know, acoustically, and what Larry was doing as far as playing music. But like, I've gone to some clubs, and it's not until now where I reflect and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, that sound system really was something else. You know, so you kind of appreciate it a little bit more as you get older. But did that give you a different perspective on sound and massiveness of like a club like the Paradise Garage?
It did, because it was such a huge venue, and like you said, acoustically, it was totally different than anything I had ever heard. I mean, granted, I was a kid, so you know, it just sounded like loud music. But like you said, thinking back and in comparison to other things, because you know, the sound was a very important component. And a lot of other venues I had been to at that point, you know, it was just, we just need enough sound to fill this place up. It wasn't acoustically correct. It wasn't, you know, Paradise Garage was, I mean, that system was just incredible. And you know, years later you look back, especially after going to so many different venues over the years, and you can compare and contrast. You're like, that system was something else. You know?
Now, before we move forward and talking about Larry Levan, what's your point of view? Because you made a great point. He played music, right? It's unfortunate that in today's world, the garage kind of has this stigmata of only being classics, you know, or only playing a certain type of music. And the parties, the tributes that are being done in the name of the Paradise Garage and Larry Levan seem to stick to the same playlist. You know, they played the same classics. And you know, talking to a few people, I understand that there's a nostalgia based on that, right? And hearing the song being replayed over and over again just brings back a certain memory. And I get that, I understand that. But at the same point, you got to move forward. And if you really want to play tribute to someone like Larry Levan, and what the Paradise Garage stood for is, he really took chances musically, and that's what a lot of people forget, and so they stay narrow-minded even when they do parties today and play it safe, right? Well, how does that work also in the hip-hop world? Because I want to touch base on your radio show that you do, Flip the Script, which I think has a very, very good show, the music-wise, what you guys put together, and ultimately what your message is about. It's almost like you're carrying the torch on what underground radio used to do for hip-hop years ago. And I know for you, that's important musically, because you really don't get involved in something that's just the norm.
Not at all.
And I know you've been at this for a long time, trying to find that place that gives you, you know, that good feeling to say, I'm happy with being a part of this because now I can promote what you believe musically, right? So what do you see the difference now as far as where this whole, you know, bubble of names and genres are being thrown at out there in social media?
As far as like DJ's popularity, or
everything, popularity, what they're playing, you know.
I think it's like anything else, right? Everything is based on a reference point, right? So if you grew up in a certain time and you've only seen a certain thing done a certain way, that's your reference. Right? So I use this analogy a lot of times. Well, I don't even know if you could call it an analogy, but this example, and a lot of people kind of have like a, hey, you know what? There's something to that moment. Like 20 years ago, there was people that did, like, we called them mobile DJs. They did weddings, bar mitzvahs. They were more like DJ services, right? And then you had the guys in the clubs that were breaking music and had like a certain skill level. It was kind of like, it was two different worlds, totally. Like one was something artistic and one was more of a service. At some point in time, those two worlds became one. So guys that were doing a more DJ service kind of a thing and more of a mainstream kind of a thing, it was like Sweet 16 on a Friday and then in a club on a Saturday, but with the same musical approach. So basically what happens is, over time, you indoctrinate generations of people to a certain style of playing, and that's all they really understand. They feel like they view DJing as something that's not artistic, but a service. No different from anything else that's in the venue. The bouncer, the bartender, not taking anything away from what they do. I mean, they're all necessary, but the DJ is looked at the same way. So they've taken all the art out of it and turned it strictly into something that, you know, is a service just to make people happy, because that's kind of all they've ever seen. They don't come from a time when you followed a DJ because of what they did. You know, I always say DJs now get bookings on who they bring, not what they bring. Of course. You know, back in the day, or you know, at a different time, promoters would say, this is what we want in our venue. So if we get this guy, this is what he's going to bring. And then later on, it just became a numbers game. You know, and that's why you see like a lot of younger guys who have friends that are still going out every week. You know, that changes as you age. And you know, they get their big turnouts, and what happens, they all have the same kind of reference point. A lot of them play the same way, and that formula becomes all people really know. So if you do an event and you try to do something that's a little left of center, or you're not doing, because think about it, you know, there's people that their entire life, everywhere they've ever gone, it's been the same thing done the same way. Whether it's a wedding, a club, a Sweet 16, their kids' party, they've never seen DJing done in an artistic way where the DJ took risks and played music that they may have not been familiar with. So when they go somewhere where that's not happening, they go, where's the sirens? Where's the smoke? Where's the, I mean, it happens to me still to this day. I mean, for the most part, people come to anything I do because, I mean, I've been doing it long enough where if my name is attached to something, they kind of know what they're going to get. But, you know, what happens eventually over time, the word gets out that there's a hot party somewhere, and in the average person's mind, they're thinking, all right, it's what, you know, it's what we're used to. And then they walk in and it's like James Brown records and Bob James records, and they're like, what's going on here, you know? So really it all kind of goes back to reference point, you know, and so many guys, so many younger DJs that grew up with that formula, that's all they really understand. They don't understand. And you know, listen, we all want feedback from audiences, we all want to keep working, you know, and for, you know, some people, they want to just kind of play it safe and do the stuff that works. But musically, you know, we suffer, because that's really, people always constantly complain about the state of music, and part of the reason why we are where we are is because DJs are not exposing people to anything else.
I mean, that seems to be the biggest talk in social media right now, right? And even those DJs that are playing the safety records are going out there and saying, "Oh, let's do something different," but yet you're still doing the same thing.
They don't know what different means. They have their concept of different. Again, they don't approach it artistically. They're approaching it with, we have to make these people happy. And listen, I've even seen legendary DJs, guys that I look up to, right? And you know me, man. I don't pull any punches.
Yeah, I know.
I have no problem saying that I feel I've already been ostracized, and so it doesn't make a difference. Cancel, is that the new word? I've seen legendary guys talking about, it's all about them. It's not about you. Play, people forget it's about the audience. It's like, listen, at some point, if you're not playing any music that you feel confident about and that you feel needs to be heard, then there's never going to be a future classic. At one time, a record like a Rock Creek Park or an Apache or Dance to the Drummer's Beat, those were all questionable songs at one time. They've only got the iconic status that they have now because someone
took a chance,
had the courage to break those records. So this whole I'm part of the Rick Rubin train of thought. I don't know if you saw that viral clip that he had where the audience comes last. The idea is to take people on a musical journey, not to let them dictate the journey.
I think that on itself takes a special someone, right? Because
someone that likes not being broke, someone that doesn't want a lot of bookings. But
I mean that's the reality, though, right? In order to create a movement, you have to break off the path,
of course,
and you have to be willing, both financially and probably reputational wise, to take that risk, right? So I think that the latter it's too much work. You know what? I don't like throwing a party with the most fantastic music but only having 5 people show up, right? I think they're not willing to put the hard work. And it's almost, to me, it's almost like, well, why is that formula not working with what we have today, both through media, social, platforms? Before, it was a flyer,
right,
and it was a word of mouth, right? And it was going there and taking the chance on driving God knows where at a dumpy place, when you're young, but then walking in there and just be musically, educated.
I have a theory on why things, because you have to remember, we have a reference point, right? We were active then, and we're active now. And I just, from what I see, compared to, I try to put myself in my young brain and how I thought and how audiences were back then. I just don't think music now serves the same purpose in people's lives that it used to.
Oh, that's a great point.
I don't think it's as important as it used to be. It's everywhere. It's super accessible. Anyone can make it now because there's no real standard anymore. I mean, I know that sounds like gatekeeper talk, but there is a level of curation and gatekeeping that's necessary. Because why acquire decades of musical experience if you're not going to pass it on to the next generation? The reason why people like a lot of the things that they like is, one, because they've been programmed to like it. That's all they've ever heard. But musically, they're not educated. They can't pick out elements of a song that they like bass lines and chord progressions, and they're just not educated in that matter. If the song serves a certain purpose as sonic wallpaper in a club and everybody dances and everybody knows it and loves it, in their minds, that's enough. So
the quick,
it's just instant gratification, like a lot of other things nowadays.
Exactly.
And I just think that we used to seek it out because we couldn't get enough of it. Now it's kind of like music is last on the list. First is who's there, how big is the venue, how fancy is the venue. We never looked at anything like that. That's why that whole late 90s, early 2000s, that bottle service, VIP, all that kind of stuff, when that worked its way into the clubs.
That changed a
and
lot.
And this is one of the things to go back to the garage and clubs like the garage, whether it was the Loft or other way earlier. I never understood what was with this whole membership thing. I thought that was kind of elitist BS when I was younger. I never really got it. But now, looking back in retrospect, I understand why they did what they did, because they wanted to have a place where they could take musical risks and they could play a certain kind of way, and they knew that if outsiders started to come in, and started to, because listen, let's be honest, like people that like terrible music outnumber the people that like great music, right? It's just the numbers thing, right?
True. Yeah.
Music is just not as important to most people. Nothing against people, but let's just be honest. Call it what there's pop music for a reason.
Yeah.
And the club owners back then knew that if these people infiltrate, now we're going to be forced to cater to these people in all respects, musically. So all the things that have become the norm now, like bottle service and VIP, like these are clubbing, even the term. That stuff never existed before.
Yeah.
It's just like in hip hop, there's like this whole like, this is a record for the ladies, this is a record for the street, this is, because that's all label manufactured, compartmentalized BS. At one time, it was just music.
Yeah, exactly.
Now,
Chris, what keeps you rooted to seek and educate and promote the music that you do at your show and yourself?
I think the main thing is that I was an artist myself at one time, and it was during a different time. It was pre-digital era, when you had to have physical copies and press vinyl, and there was a chance that as an independent artist, you would hear your music in a mix show, because you had to make the commitment to press vinyl, to go out, get it to DJs, hope that they would play it.
Do the work.
Right. Now, it's so easy and accessible that it's just way oversaturated. I mean, it's just such a cliched argument at this point, but it's the absolute truth, So I remember being like a bedroom artist and just, listening to the radio, hoping to hear. I remember like the first time I heard, I don't know what FM station played our single first. It was like, we made it.
What was the name of the band you were with?
Mind Crooks. It was called Remember the Face.
Okay.
And then years later, I got involved with like live units. But the Mind Crooks thing was in the 90s, so it was really a different time.
Yep.
But now it's like there's so much music, out, and so many artists, a lot of them younger, that are making great music that never had the opportunity to experience that feeling.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just at this point, it's almost like I'm just giving back. I wanted to create that platform where an artist could submit music, and if it was good, they'd hear it.
I got you.
Just to give people that feeling again.
What do you look for when a new artist sends you a song? Like what hits you right at the gut?
There's got to be lyrical content. There's got to be originality. There's got to be production's got to be a certain way. I mean, we specialize in that traditional style hip hop. I mean, but we do play things that are experimental. Basically, a lot of artists that aren't following formulas, because hip hop, especially, all music, but hip hop especially, has become extremely formulaic. I mean, and there's a formula, there's a template, and audiences and artists themselves have grown up with this formula. It's all they know. They've never heard anything else.
Same in the dance music.
It's the same thing. But hip hop is, you're talking about lyrical content. Where we're talking about the same four subject. And this is not a new phenomenon. This started way back. I won't say any names, with artists who are considered legendary at this point. But they had four topics. And that's why when you ask people, even people from our era, who's your favorite MCs, who's your favorite, it's always the same 5 or 6 names, right? Now, there was a lot of artists at the same time that a Jay-Z and a Nas and a Biggie and all these guys were doing music that were as good, better, lyrically, but that audience wasn't listening to those guys. These are the names that they've heard since they're 10 years old growing up, that these 5 guys are the best. And we all know that there's no best in anything artistic. That's ridiculous to begin with. But if we want to go there, I mean, people will go on and on about Biggie's first album and Nas's first album, but you mention a group like an Organized Confusion, or an artist like an OC, or artists like, you can go on and on and on. They don't even know who these people are. So you're making these arguments, but your reference point is so limited. You know what I mean? Your argument is not, there's opinions and then there's educated opinions.
Absolutely.
And most people's opinions are just rehashed and uneducated.
Now, I remember you put a post not too long ago asking the young producers to go out there and dig, right? To find those records, that there's a lot more beats, a lot more things out there that you can utilize in your production.
I know the post you're talking about.
Rather than staying with the same formula, right? And to me, I've always felt that the hip-hop, the true hip-hop DJs, aficionados, lovers, they're the ones that crossed over in the best possible way to search, to dig, to be diggers and find those tunes that just blow your mind. A funk group from Mexico back in the 60s, right? You would use those chords and loop that. But to me, what's fascinating is that search to find that. It's almost like, man, I have to make my production stand out. I have to find these records. And something that I'm learning more and more and more through the years, even putting into, you know, where I am right now with my show, with my live stream, with the
Which
parties.
is great, by the way.
Thank you. With the parties that I dig is, yes, as you go out there, you realize, man, there is just so much music.
Yeah, it's a lifelong journey.
And even here in the States, we were so limited to get music from other countries, you know, to get those imports coming in. Even working at the record store, I remember, you know, you would get 2 or 3 of an import and that's it. You would never see it again.
Never saw it again.
But I see that honing more towards the hip hop DJs, and is that something that you feel has kind of giving the production of hip hop, some of the old artists, that edge?
Well, what happened in hip hop is that it was initially obviously built off of break beats.
Yep.
Originally in the park jams and things like that, pre-hip hop record, it was a DJ cutting up doubles of a break and just extending it. So it moved from that into sampling. All the greatest records, you know, are all just great loops, great samples. Then you had producers like Jay Dilla that took that whole sampling to even another level with the chopping and all the different techniques that they used. But what happened was, in the early days, they used to get away with sampling because hip hop wasn't this worldwide phenomenon. As it got more popular, now they wanted ridiculous amounts of money to clear samples. So what happened was, I call it the keyboard beats era, like the early 2000s. People got away from sampling, and it was all that like kind of like Rough Riders stuff and all that like just playing stuff on keyboards, which to me, I hated that entire era. I hate, like, that sound just did not do it for me at all. So they kind of got away from sampling. So now you have a whole generation of people, again, right, reference point. They grew up on that style of production. So to hear samples and loops, it doesn't trigger anything in their brains, right? It just sounds dated to them. But you know that the original formula is always what works, because what happened? Then you have an artist like a Kanye, right, who comes back, right? He comes out at, I forget whatever year he made his debut, and returns to sampling. He's on a label that's got money to clear samples, right? So now he can use that same kind of traditional approach and resell it to a new generation. Now it's new all over again, right? The reason that so it just goes to show you that people will always love the traditional way. It's just got to be, it's the way it's marketed, it's the way it's presented. Unfortunately now, people just don't really know what they like. They have to kind of be told what to like.
Yeah, that's true.
Their tastes now are not, we were a little bit different coming up. We were a little more open-minded.
Absolutely.
We kind of had an idea of what we liked when we heard it. It didn't need anyone's endorsement. It didn't need any other DJ to play it. It was just, I like it and I'm going to play it. Now, I mean, I'm hoping that that's something that starts to change. It looks like it's starting to change. But the reason I posted that was because even with a lot of the underground artists that have returned to sampling and using samples, you know, I've been doing this a long time and I've been digging for a long time. And when we get a lot of music submissions to our show, it's a lot of things that have been used so many times.
Got it.
And it's just like, the reason I posted that was like, do the knowledge of, you know, what things have been used and what artists have been heavily sampled. And not to say stay away from it, because you can always create something new out of something that's been used a million times, you know, but at least do a little bit of research to see that, you know,
there's some more out there.
This record has been used like 60 times already.
Got it.
These drums have been used 1,000 times. Like there's other stuff. But hey, listen, man, I'm just glad that they're sampling again and they're using things like this. So, you know, it's a learning curve. You know, there's artists. The show's been on, we're going on 10 years in February, which is crazy to me, right? 400, we just did our 475th episode.
That's a huge amount.
3 hours a week, right? So think about how much music.
For those who think that, hey, let me just start up a show and, you know, things would work out and I'll get, you know, 1,000 viewers. It does not work that way. I don't think people really understand even this, you know, to get good content and to make it grow organically is the hardest thing to do. You know, they talk about you can buy views, you know, you can buy 500,000 views, whatever it is, but to really purely let it grow organically, to really reach the people that want to listen, it's a very difficult job. It takes a lot of work. Even doing something like this, putting it together, finding the content.
Anything at a grassroots level.
Absolutely. Even with the events that we still do, we did a party with another partner of mine for almost 10 years in Bloomfield, a free party. You know, it started off fantastic and then it kind of just died down, you know? And some people were like, well, it's free, I can go at any time. It may not be worth anything. Oh, it's free, that cheapened the event. And I never really understood that term, but I can understand now. I can kind of understand it now.
You know, us as people who are kind of artistically minded, we kind of always lack in the business department.
Absolutely.
That's a huge, and that's always been a conflict within music itself, right? Whether it's between artists and labels, they never see the vision. How many times have you heard stories of, you know, I don't know, Elvis went to such and such a label and they turned him down. You don't have a shot, and then they go somewhere else. You know, but when it comes to the show, though, I got to give credit to the creator of the show, my partner Greystoke. We worked on events years ago, and then we kind of came together because he reached out. He put the show together, and I had just come off of doing WBAI, so I was very disgruntled. Like, think about it, man.
Yeah, I remember.
I did FM radio for almost a decade, and it never generated any work for me as a DJ, and it was a lot of work to do the show. I mean, we had to bring turntables every week up to the 10th floor of an office building. It was a labor of love for sure. So when Greystoke approached me about doing the show, I was a little reluctant. I was kind of done with everything. I just said, you know what, it's time to go back to being a bedroom DJ and just kind of leave it at that. No one seems to care about this the way that I do, so you know, at a certain point, you know, you feel defeated. But I reluctantly, you know, decided to do it. And then the other thing too was, like, again, coming off of FM radio, now we're going to do something online. Everybody does something online. I call it the everybody does everything era. We can talk about that too. But I reluctantly did it, and thanks to Greystoke and my other co-host Mateo, who's also involved in the show wouldn't be the show without the three components. I feel, you know, like musically it might be me or whatever, but the show, you know, the dynamic would not be the same. So shouts to Greystoke for bringing me back from the dead a little bit, because it definitely changed my my mindset, and it forced me to get out there and really dig again. And one thing I did not want to show, and this is another thing we could touch on really quickly. I don't want to take over. I'm so used to doing the interviews.
I know, that's fine. Hey, go for it, man. That's all you.
I did not want the show to become old man radio. I did not want the show to become this nostalgia 90s. Like, I was there, I lived it, I was active then. I'm not trying to recreate anything. I wanted the show to become a platform for the artists that are doing it now. Because there's so many people that claim all these purist titles, and I only play vinyl, and I only do this, and but you're playing records from 30 years ago. Like, what about the artists that are making music now? How are they going to ever establish any kind of a legacy like some of these other artists were able to do if no one's playing their music? So what are we going to do? We're gonna, you know, anything post '94, we just act like never existed. I wanted the show, like I said earlier, I wanted the show to be a motivating force for us, you know, presenting the show, and for artists that are creating music. I mean, listen, there's a lot of artists, and this sounds kind of crazy, but that are making hip hop, that when I play their music on the show and I cut up doubles of their records, they'll email me and say, that was crazy, I never heard my music. And to us, that was the norm, right? To hear guys like Red Alert, these guys cut records up. So you can't take for granted anything that we've kind of experienced and just assume that younger generations of people know about it, because they don't, because they were never educated. It's not their fault. That's why a lot of these older guys that shit on, can we curse here? Is this that shit on a lot? First of all, that's not the way to appeal to people. You just got to kind of help them understand that what they're listening to has kind of been this kind of prepackaged, formulaic thing, and there's a whole other thing out there. Because a lot of people just don't really understand how the industry works. They think that if someone is talented and their music is good, it's just going to become successful by default. Labels in the industry create artists. If they put the mechanism behind an artist, listen, I remember when Eminem was an underground rapper, I have records that he gave me himself at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, then, you know, he just happened to be the one guy with that kind of technical skill, which was tons of cats in the underground were, you know, as good or better, but he got the marketing, he got the push. He's the guy people know about. Not taking away from anything that he's ever done, but don't wait around for a big label to tell you who to like. Just do a little. It's so easy now. People have more access to music now than they've ever had, yet it seems like their tastes are even more limited, which makes no sense.
On that point, you hit some amazing.
I got a lot to say.
You hit some amazing stuff. We may need to do like a 3-hour part for this conversation, but I love it. So, one, you hit a big thing as far as, you know, educating people, right? And I think that's for me, for what I'm trying to do now, especially in the jazz, which I want to talk to you about hip hop and jazz, because I think that jazz is it's taken so differently in the hip hop world than it is on the dance movement world, only because I've only been pushing my whole jazz dance fusion name into the parties that I've done probably in the last 7 to 8, maybe 10 years, more consistently, right? Instead of putting house music on my flyers, it's always rare grooves, jazz, dance, fusion.
Letting people know what they're in store for.
So a lot of people, it's like, as soon as they see jazz, it's like, I don't want to go there and sleep, right? Like that whole mentality of what jazz was, it's like, it's a smoky place, I'm just gonna sit, there's no dancing, you know, it's just something for me to put me, you know, to sleep. No, it's not. There's certain type of jazz, especially that has been adored, loved in places like the UK, Europe, Japan, you know, that it's danceable. And when you think about it, jazz was the original dance music back in the 40s, 50s, right? So we kind of, unfortunately, with radio play here, and stations, not to take away stations like CD 101.9 back in that day, where they lean towards more the Kenny G stuff, more smooth jazz. I can see how that was brought up. And even WBGO doesn't really push forward.
It's a lot of the same artists.
That stuff that I'm talking about. So a lot of people are already hesitant just looking at the flyer and seeing words like jazz, dance, fusion. It's like, no, that's not my type of party. Okay, but when you go there, you know, jazz, dance, fusion is, hey, people play Los Conquistadores Chocolates, you know, Johnny Hammond, right? It's people like that. It's people like even the B-sides or the A-sides of early David Sanborn stuff that is more lyrical, you know, Pete Escovedo's, you know, I mean, these are artists. If you look at just what the musicians were doing in the 70s, they took chances. They could have crossed over later, but that early music was so pure, you know, so uplifting. Even stuff like Santana, you know, I mean, there's just so many different artists, and even Coltrane at some point.
Oh yeah,
you know, my daughter Art Webb, Coltrane, all of these guys.
My middle daughter's named Naima after Coltrane.
There you go.
One of my favorite songs of all time.
You know, all of these artists gave us those songs, but to me, it's just, we weren't educated, we weren't groomed, especially here, to even understand or know that this song by, you know, David Sanborn is danceable. It's not your typical sleepy music. And even trying to promote that, it's taking such a longer, a harder challenge to sell people that if you listen to the shows on Thursdays, if you go to the archives on YouTube, you will get a glimpse. And that's not even touching on the stuff that we kind of come in the middle, like the Cortex, right? Like stuff from Europe that's got that trippy hip-hop loungy, or what they call now library, or Valeric, you know, style.
Everything needs a label.
Right? That's all stuff that Bob James was doing back in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, again, even with that, it really all goes back to the same thing. It's just people are just, it's education, right, and exposure.
But we're there trying to educate them. Right. Why are they not drinking the Kool-Aid? Is it because the other people are like, hey, stay away, I'm not into that?
It goes back to a lot of what we talked about before, right? A lot of people, and this is an old saying, but a lot of people will never support what you do because it's you. You know what I mean?
That's
really the only you know, reason. There's a lot of people that for some reason Some people are people that people look up to for whatever reason, whether it's their looks, whether it's their clothing, whether it's their what they're attached to, what they're now. There are no more organic movements. That's something that I've been trying to recreate, and we all try to recreate, right? Because that's what we remember and that's what we miss. Everything now kind of comes from like a pre-dictated, like it comes from corporate. But the audience doesn't understand that. Like they think it's their movement, especially like with a lot of the youth. There's an old documentary from the mid-90s, but it's still totally relevant. It's called The Merchants of Cool. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I need to catch
but it basically shows how people kind of just sit around boardrooms and figure out what they're going to sell people.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So people,
I've seen something to that.
Yeah, there's other documentaries, but you know, there's people who they assume that they're part of an organic movement, but they're really not. Even when it comes to things like quote-unquote streetwear, like certain companies will. So people want to be identified with a certain kind of a movement, right? So it's like I wear my Supreme shirt, so everybody here now knows that I might be a skater, I might be a hip hop guy. You know, back in the day, it was organic. Like we took clothing that already existed, Lee's, BVDs, Kangos, sheepskins. This was not streetwear. We made it streetwear. That's why the culture and everything was so much more fresh and so much more. It was more innovative at the time. I don't like to harp on those things because it turns younger people's brains off. But because, you know, everybody constantly want to reinvent the wheel, and they want to create something that they can claim for their own. But they don't understand that it's not their efforts. It's not coming from the same place. It's just not organic. Right. So, and I think that's what we need to get back to. And I think DJs. Really, man, I blame a lot of what's wrong in music now on DJs 100%. Because DJs are the people that should be taking the risks, that should be exposing people. Listen, you, myself, you know, Juan, all these guys, Alexander Technique that you had on the show, who's also a huge influence on me as a DJ because his equipment in his basement was the first time I could ever really get hands on and spend time on it. So shouts to Al.
That's right, guys.
But I forgot where I was going with that. But
DJs like us,
but yeah, DJs like us, we took risks. You know, it wasn't. We were trying to create movements. We weren't trying to emulate, you know, what everyone else was doing. So
I mean, there's definitely a huge, you know, light to put on that whole. I need to belong to this camp versus that camp, and I need to be seen around these parties. Not so much, you know, the other party. Even though the other party might be, you know, musically educating people, I think there's still about 20 years that people need to catch up musically in order for them to get educated and understand.
Well, it's like you mentioned the jazz thing, right? You know, people don't realize that there was this whole movement of like jazz fusion.
Absolutely.
And even the concept of the idea of what's danceable and what isn't. See, you have to come from a time before to really understand where all these things came from. These are all industry created. Even the concept of like the hater was something created by the industry. It was like calling someone a conspiracy theorist, right? You immediately discredit someone. Like we have people that kind of know better, but now we're marketing this, and if you critique it, you're just a hater. So basically, what they did was they stigmatized anyone that critiqued their garbage product and allowed them to continue to do what they do and, you know, print money, you know, from, you know, so again, man, reference points, everything. So
and I think if you are a DJ or even just a music lover, you know, I urge you to go outside of this tri-state area, outside of, you know, even the US, and go out to experience a party in Europe, in Japan, and you'll see how all of these movements, all of these different types of music really are loved and highlighted and played, and people love it, right? I think that's one of the things that really hurt the US market, is the fact that for a long time we had, you know, not corporations owning the radio stations like they do now. Only one actually owns all of FM radio, right? We had actual individuals that went to the clubs. You know, you had Frankie Crocker that partied the garage, so he was on the streets. He was able to hear and see the different influences of what Larry was playing, and take that and put it into a radio format. And again, it's like, once you reach a certain age, I understand that you become so narrow-minded and you want to play it safe, and you think that, hey, You know, all of these outdoor events now are bringing thousands, not hundreds, 3,000, 4,000 people. Here is the biggest platform that you have to educate people, you know, but you don't. You want to play it safe because you want to have now 5,000 people come back next year, right? And the only way they're going to do that is to stick to a formula.
Right.
This worked, right? And hands, you know, I mean, I crossed that bridge when I was doing Military Park. They were like, this is not what we want, so bring in everybody else that can bring us 3,000, 4,000 people to where it is now.
It's just, you know, people just, they don't view this as anything artistic.
Yeah.
They view it, again, like a service. They can front and they can act like it's an underground house or it's a deep house movement or it's this or it's that, but don't deviate from these songs or don't deviate from this formula or format. Because look, let's be honest, at the end of the day, DJs thrive off of crowd reaction, right? Yeah. So, you know,
that's one of the reasons why a lot of these young DJs get in, right? They see someone playing up there, like, oh, I want to do that.
I can control this whole room.
Exactly.
And listen, I can't lie, it's a great feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And we love it.
There's been times where, you know, I have been in the right kind of a setting where I can actually play a certain way and you get that feedback. And I say to myself, like, I can see how this could become addictive.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because let's be honest, like, we could take our skill set as DJs, like me in the hip hop realm, you and what you do, and apply it to a more commercial style of music.
Yeah.
And easily, you know, we probably could have become full-time DJs and did that as a career.
Yeah.
So people don't understand, not to, like, you know, toot our own horns or anything, but the sacrifice that comes along with trying to maintain musical integrity. Yeah. I care too much about the music. You know, like, it's like in the 90s, and I've talked about this on the show a million times, so people that watch this and listen to Flip, but it's such an important thing. In the 90s, in the early 90s, when hip-hop really started to change, when the whole, like, shiny suit, Puff Daddy era started, I just couldn't believe how quickly people jumped on the bandwagon and started playing all these, like, obvious attempts at records that were made just for airplay, right? What they were trying to do is they were trying to take something that was a subculture, hip-hop, and make it more appealing to an audience that probably wouldn't have listened to it before, but because we put an R&B chorus, you know, things like we kind of tweaked the formula a little bit, and, you know, now we kind of put it out there, and people just jumped on the bandwagon. If DJs would have just maintained a little bit of integrity at that time, and they would have just kind of held out a little bit, a lot of other movements wouldn't have happened that were like the final nail in the casket. I'm not going to call out any regions, you know, but and that now we're here. Right? So now you get a lot of these old fogey DJs, right, that are like, I don't make no good music. Yeah, but at the time, you were playing all that stuff.
Exactly.
There's legends, guys that I remember. I was at these events playing all that stuff. Like, you can't, like, I can understand if you're a younger person, these are records you kind of came up with, this is what you think you need to do. But people that knew better, they just wanted to check. You know, so listen, man, you know, it happens. You know, it happens in the mafia. Somebody's selling somebody out. They sold the culture down the river. You know?
You hit a great point there. I remember a friend reached out a while ago, and they said, "Hey, you know, see, I checked out your show, and wow, you know, when did you get into funk and soul and jazz? You know, I remember you were all Red
house
Zone
guy.
and house."
Right.
You know, I said, well, I mean, I still love it. I still have it. But I choose not to collect the repetitiveness of what's being produced out there.
Right.
It's not what. First of all, it doesn't satisfy my soul. Second of all, now I'm competing with a million other people if I wanted to go that way. And to your point, I mean, I think I have the skills.
You could outplay all.
To outplay all of them. Yeah, let's be real. But I'm choosing for the love of music, because I love, and I'm finding all of this other genres that it's like, how can you not love this music, right? That you know, even some people that know me, it's kind of like, okay, when did you start playing? And you know, I would say, well, if you went to the parties that I used to do with Eric Temier back in Elizabeth, I was playing stuff, quote unquote, like acid jazz, which was the term of what was coming out, which was at that time, right? These are the terms that we were limited to know here. And the only way I found out about the parties and the whole jazz dance fusion movement in the UK was through the magazines. There was no internet. It was the magazines that came into the record stores, looking at the list and saying, oh wow, you know, they're playing Jazz Carnival at a party. Okay, we hardly heard Jazz Carnival here, but we hear whatever Joe Smo's producing, like there's, you know, 1,000 times. Exactly. So, you know, part of it is also self-growth, right? I think that we all reach that point musically where we kind of question ourselves, like, what else is out there?
Yeah.
And it's part of like just growth and taking that chance. Now it's like, no, you know what? I want to stick to this because I believe in the integrity of that music and I want to play it. I want to showcase it. And that's the key that I think a lot of people are afraid of doing.
This is what we have to understand though. A lot of people, we are music lovers. We got into DJing and what we do because we loved the music and couldn't get enough of it. But a lot of people got into this, you know, DJing, again, it's a service. It's a lot of people's side hustle.
Yeah.
They cannot I've talked to people who just cannot understand how, as a DJ, I don't even tell people I DJ. There's people that I've worked with, that I've worked with for 30 years that don't know because
they already have their form of
to open that door, open that door to the discussion of like, well, you know, you don't do weddings, you don't like, how can you not? Like, you know, it's hard to open that door, and I rather just, you know, the people that know, and the ones that don't. And that's the thing, man. You know, a lot of people just they didn't get into this because of the music. They got into it as, you know, a side job.
Quick question for you. Do you consider them real DJs? These guys that are doing Sweet 16s that now think they can rock a club, that think they can go out and you know, do one of these outdoor events.
The problem is that now they can, because these, like I said earlier, these guys are the people that have shaped an entire generation of people's musical taste, right? So now they're able to get away with those kinds of things because they're not in front of people that demand more from them. You know what I mean?
So what do you think changed though? Because we used to do it, right? When we started, and I guess it's because
the music was better.
Okay, right. So you were able to carry that,
right, of course.
Rock a party at a wedding. They wanted to hear, you know.
There was still some kind of a standard in music.
Right.
There was still real A&R work being done.
Correct.
There's always been pop music. There's always been music for the masses, but there was always a level of musicianship. Like you listen to like Michael Jackson, Off the Wall. Like even though they're pop tunes, it's not Return to Forever or Mahavishnu Orchestra. But there's still a level of musicianship there. You know, we've gotten so far away from that now that, you know, music is just. It's all computer generated kind of.
We're almost afraid to get the playlist for a Sweet 16 because we would be like, nah, you know, right? Yeah. So it's our choice that we've kind of. It's a choice you make, right? And hey, if that's your hustle and you know you're making money through doing it, we also know that there's the business side, right? The business side of doing these parties like posh DJs and everyone who does weddings. Yeah, there's money to be made. You can make a lot of money. But after a while, it's not going to feed your soul, but especially if you want to stay integrity to the music, right? If you want to have that thing about the music, you can go on, you know, automatic mode and keep doing them. You probably get booked 7 days out of the week. You know, you'll make a lot of money if that's the route you want to take, doing the mobile DJs. But to create a movement, to try to stay true to the art of just promoting good music, it's not even about the skill at this point. It's just about pulling ears to take that chance into listening and opening up their minds to what else is out there. That is a bigger challenge now.
A total challenge
to do that, right?
I mean, and that's the thing. Like you have, like we said earlier, you make a choice, right? So if you've chosen this other route, the non-mainstream route, what you need to do is you have to create your own venues. You have to create your own kinds of spaces and market it, you know, and try to get people to share that vision and understand it. And that's really a big part of the battle, is finding venue owners that will allow you to take the time that it takes. Because look, what happens? They book DJs, they want instant turnout, they want to make money, of course. It's business, they have all the overhead, right? They got to pay staff. I mean, I get it, it's business. But by the same token, you know, if they want their venue to stand out and offer something that other places may not offer, because you know what happens, a place opens up, it's the hot spot for a couple years, and then a place down the block opens up and it's bigger, fancier, more lights, more smoke machines, more foam, and then everybody gravitates to that. But if you're offering something musically that no one else can replicate, right, because they just don't have the musical knowledge or the skill, then you're going to stand out. Unfortunately, you know, again, like business owners, they have a lot of overhead, they have a lot of expenses, and they got to pay bills. So, you know, when you're trying to do the things that we do, it's a choice and it's a sacrifice, and you know, it's tough now because you're dealing with a generation of people and patrons who are not, that didn't come up the way we did. They've never been exposed. We're trying to recreate something or create something that we long for, but you have to understand that the patrons have no concept of that, right? So it's hard for us to, it's like, I use myself as an example. I never watched a sport in my life. I don't know anything about sports. I couldn't tell you one athlete's name in any sport. Yet to some people, sports are, they live and breathe it, right? Now, not knocking them, right? But it's the same thing for music, people that are music heads, right? It's hard for us to understand how people could just not care. But to some people, it's just not important. It's sonic wallpaper. They work all week. They go out on a Friday night. They want to hear the tunes they love and stuff they heard in their car on the way to the club, in the club. And we come from such a totally different world that it's hard for us to make that connection and understand that mindset.
It's the opposite for us.
It's the opposite.
How could you sit there and listen to this repetitiveness
like
for 5 hours?
How many, like, there's, you know, I work with teenagers, right? So I'll talk to some of the kids, and I try not to come off as like the old back in my day guy. But I'll point out certain things about music. I'll be like, don't you realize that everyone's, first of all, you can't use words like cadence because they don't know what it means, right? So I try to like dumb it down and say like, don't you realize that all these guys rhyme the same way? It's all the same kind of delivery. Like, you don't notice that this guy sounds like that guy, and it just doesn't register. See, because in our time it was such a taboo, right? If you sounded like someone else, you were a biter. Now you have to sound like everyone else.
That is true.
Right? Everything is the inverse now. All the things that we remember, all the standards that we kind of stick to, now it's a total opposite. Now it's the idea is, I want to be part of this thing, and this is what people do, so this is what I do.
That's a great point.
But that's basically what it is, and that's the same. It applies with DJs. It applies across the board. Even with like, all right, we're gonna ruffle some feathers now, right? Even in like the whole like real DJ vinyl guy movements, this whole 45 thing happened, right? So we go to extremes, right? First it was Serato comes out. I was reluctant, and then I eventually eventually embraced it because I wanted to continue to play new music, right? And I said, if the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if I embrace this technology. Plus, it's just incredible. I can have my entire library and then some with me, right? So then that started, and then the gimmick, the counter became vinyl only. So is it about the music or is it about the format?
That's very true.
Is Dance to the Drummer's Beat different if I play it on vinyl? Like, is the song
45 MP3 wave?
And don't give me all the audiophile stuff because you guys are all full of shit. You know, I could play you a 128 MP3 and you wouldn't know the difference if it was on a Richard Long sounds. Some of you might. But you know the point I'm making. So then vinyl wasn't enough, so now we have to go to 45. So now it's, I'm at parties and guys are playing like the most common records in the world, like Slick Rick Children's Story on 45. And it's like this huge deal. So it became this like, look what I got contest. And to me that shit is just so whack. And plus, and let's be honest, records are very accessible now. Cats can Shazam stuff, go on Discogs, look up a title. If you're some trust fund baby that's got some money, you go on these websites, you pay all this exorbitant amount of money for now you have these records, now you walk around with your chest sticking out like, I'm a DJ too now. You can't mix with a blender, right? You have no concept of, but you have vinyl. So now your format of choice is your crutch. I would rather see someone kill it on a controller than be able to say, you know, I got this on vinyl. Like, it doesn't, and I'm a vinyl guy, like, trust me. Like,
I know.
My collection, I got stuff in my collection that I could sell and buy a home, like, you know what I mean? Which I may eventually do. Cortex records, I mean, in the 90s I had those records. And I felt like when I released myself from that, it almost
being pinned down,
the burden of having a certain format and all the BS that went. Like, I used to go to shows, I was in all the spots digging. I was digging before digging was the thing, you know what I mean? So I kind of just it was freeing to me to just be like, look, it's all about music. Even in some of the music I play, like now I'll incorporate some like 90s R&B records and stuff that I never played at the time.
Yep.
I don't own any of that music on vinyl. There's so many records, like common records, that you would think I own that I don't own. Yep. My vinyl collection is very, very concise. It's a lot of funk, soul, rare groove, indie hip hop. I just wanted nothing to do with that movement at the time. But now in retrospect, there's music from that era that I actually can appreciate.
Yeah.
So now with the digital format, it's allowed me, like people that come to Moonshine, which is my weekly gig that I do now.
What days are you there?
Saturdays.
Okay. Every Saturday.
Yeah, every Saturday. 55 Main Street, Millburn, New Jersey. Been doing it for like 6 years. It's a great party. But people will hear me play things there that I never played, like R&B records from the 90s and stuff that I liked, and I used to enjoy hearing other DJs play in the mix, but I didn't personally want to own them. Yeah. But now, because it's so accessible, I incorporate that.
Yeah, but it goes, I mean, that's part of also, we re-listen, right? Part of like me collecting albums rather, because I've also done a switch, I think, in the last 10 years where it was more about the 12 inches, vinyl, that is.
Whatever you're into.
The singles, and some albums, because you couldn't find it. But now I'm really searching for the artists' albums, their backlog, and I'm finding some incredible stuff. And I find that an album gives you just so much more in depth about the artist itself.
It's a journey.
Right? Yeah. And that's how you learn. And then you learn, drums, trumpet, whatever it is that leads you on a bigger search, and broaden your horizon. Right? But to me, it's almost like I re-listen. Right, because we all do this, right? We buy records 1 week, we get excited, we put them aside, we buy the next one, we put them aside. So everything that's being putting aside, you go back a few years and you're like, oh my God, I had this? Like, this sounds so fresh. So I can see how that reference, or going back to like 90s, soul or R&B stuff playing in today, because it is also refreshing to where you are now musically and what you choose to, captivate people with. And people that understand won't look at you like, what the fuck is Chris doing now, right?
Well, there's people that come to gigs, and I know this, they may not ever say this to me, but they'll come to things that I do now, and I'm the underground guy. I've always been the old school underground, that's always been, and you know what, I'm cool with that.
There's an expectation with your name.
But they also, exactly, like I've kind of built a brand, is that what the kids say now?
The brand,
But when I'm out now, it's kind of like you come full circle, right? It's like a soul searching kind of thing. I can remember being in venues, hearing great DJs like Kid Capri and all the SNS back in the day. I mean, I was out every night of the week back in the day, and hearing all these records, and there was no stigma around. This has to be, you know. And I fell victim to that mindset myself a little bit, and it was partially because you have to look in retrospect, looking back, it's different. I was an active DJ at that time. I'm not trying to recreate what I think happened in the '90s. I was there.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So I was just trying to carve out a different path back then. But now, decades later, you know, it's kind of like the nostalgia factor for me. Like, you know, I'm playing like Keith Sweat records, and you know, at the time I left that to those guys.
Exactly.
You know, but now it's kind of like I can play those records. I loved all those records. You know, I mean,
and that's fine. I mean, again, you know,
if you listen to the show, that's a whole different thing.
Right. But see, to me, it's like you have to really broaden your understanding of the music and understand, if you're following Chris per se, you have to understand that where he was from, what he's been doing to, you know, it's almost like you got to let that wine age in order for you to appreciate it, right? And you cannot expect it to be a certain way only all the time, because that's the beauty of it, right? We've grown. I mean, we're way in our age now that we can go back to certain music and feel safe and almost have that happy feeling.
We've lived through multiple eras.
Absolutely, and that's all that we're doing is sharing it. So for people to kind of also come into a party with a certain, you know, expectation of what Chris's name might carry, or my name might carry, or Juan, or, you know, any of the guys that we know, it's very difficult, you know, and I think you need to open up your mind. For those that continue being on that repetitiveness, if that's what you wish to do, and the following wishes to follow that, then, you know,
more power to you.
That's more power to you. But the difficulty of trying to get that message, I think it's also hard for us, right? To kind of let people see, well, where is Chris musically now, right? And come in with a fresh perspective it's almost like hard. And to let people know, hey, yeah, I'm playing this and this and this, you also shouldn't have to put a resume or a reason why they need to come out and hear you.
Right. But there's something that people really need to understand, and you know, we're going to take a little bit of credit here, but sometimes you got to do that. Guys like us, you know, we were there at this time that everybody kind of romanticizes over. Mm-hmm. Me and hip hop especially, I was heavily involved in the whole 90s indie scene, that whole thing, right? But not only were we there, and going back to the 80s, I mean, listen, I went to the Fresh Fest, I've been to the Garage, I've seen a lot of things, right? So for us to have those experiences live in the flesh and have seen that and been active during that time, yet not be stuck there, like I'm more tuned into what's happening currently in hip hop than, you know, most people, because I have to be. I do a 3-hour show with 475 episodes over almost a decade of brand new, I hate the term underground, people listen to the show, they always, I hear too, but just for lack of a better term, you know, so I'm just as tuned in with that, because it goes either way, right? What do you have? You have guys our age, right, who are back in the day, Cool G Rap and Kate. Like, I hate guys like that, because it just shows that you really never loved this music as much as you claim to, because you didn't keep up. You can't love something as much as you claim that you do and then leave it in the 90s, you know what I mean? So, and then you get the other people who they have no interest in hearing anything that hasn't been kind of served up on a silver platter for them, right?
That's true.
Like I talk to people all the time and they're like, it's always like the two go-to names when it comes to hip hop. Well, you still got guys like J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar, whenever they want to talk about actual lyrical artists, I'm like, listen, those are the two guys you know about because they have the marketing mechanism behind them. If you like guys like that, there are so many other guys that are as good, better, similar, but they have this like mental block until someone else endorses or says
in their loop or around their feet.
Like with your parties, right? Or like with my radio show. If Jay-Z was to come out tomorrow and say, Flip the Script Radio is the go-to source, it's the shit, like we would be the biggest show on the planet.
Is that what you want?
I'd like to get there. I'd like to get to a place where we can. It's not about being big. My goal is to be really honestly the go-to source where I could take my decades of experience and effort and know-how and share that. Listen, we're not going to be here forever.
Exactly.
Right? So someone's got to carry the torch for this stuff. If you want to see an art form last and continue, then, you know, stuff like what we're doing is necessary.
Now I'm going to throw something at you. Let's say you do. How difficult do you think you know, it would be to keep the integrity of your music and what your show represents?
If the show got on like a bigger platform.
Let's say you got now sponsors, right? I mean,
I would never put myself, just like with gigs, right, over the years, I would never put myself in a situation where I could not have 100% creative control. I would never put myself, if it was the biggest deal in the world and they said, yeah, but you know, I have friends that do shows on bigger platforms, and they are forced to have guests that they really don't want. They're forced to play things, but they kind of look at it. Maybe they're onto something, and I don't get it. You know, maybe it's better to be doing something than nothing.
Could it be that we're actually telling the universe we don't really want to hit it big because we're so caught up with our integrity and our love and what our message is?
It's not even that. It's not. I want to hit it. I want to hit it big, quote unquote, my way.
Okay.
I want to do it. If it's going to become something that's big, I want what we did and what we established and what we created to be the thing that becomes big. Not take the thing that we created and we established and have somebody else tweak it and put their little spin on it, and now it becomes big. Because now it's not our thing anymore. Right? For me, like, say like the I don't know, the fantasy would be some billionaire, like say like a Dan Bilzerian or one of these guys said, I love you guys, I love the show, I love what you guys do, I want to be involved, I want to invest, I want to create whatever, and you guys just continue to do what you do the way you do it, and that would be great to me, you know what I mean? But to have to try to sell it, because I've been there, I've you know,
we've done the work.
But I've been involved in situations where, you know, no one's ever going to share your vision the way you do.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
No one's going to ever make, I can't tell you over the years how many people we've had reach out to us. Oh, I want to handle you guys' social media. Or I want to do like the legwork for you guys. Then it's 2 weeks worth of effort. It's like a toy on Christmas Day. Like it's new for a day, then it goes back under the tree. You know, no one's ever. You have to do it yourself.
Yeah, and that's the hardest part. Because only you really see that vision and what you want to represent, what that brand should represent you. And a lot of people don't have that foresight or understand what you've been through to really captivate
how you wind up at that point.
And how you want that. Exactly, exactly. So I mean, so what is next for you, the station? What is it, some of the challenges, and eventually where do you see yourself? Do you give yourself another 3 years, 5 years with what you're doing? Because before we spoke, you know, where you want to be, right? And how do you get there? So where do you see yourself in the next few years?
At this point, man, I'm just to the point where like it's almost like a soul-searching mission at this point. I've kind of done everything, and you know, maybe never became a huge success financially or whatever, but I've done a lot of the things that I wanted to do over the years. And I kind of understand where we are now musically and how things got to where they are, because I understand like the inner workings of the industry. Of course. How I had tons of friends that were A&Rs and a lot of people that worked, you know, on the inside. So understanding all that and having that perspective, I just want to, you know, do like great. It would be nice to be on a bigger platform. It would be nice to be a little more known. But I'm just at the point now where like when I stop enjoying it, when I stop feeling like there's anything to really, any music to really like spark my interest, if the music starts to become kind of stagnant, which does happen.
Yeah, it does, absolutely.
And listen, in the underground, a lot of the underground artists follow the same formulas that mainstream artists do, but they just don't know it. There's certain artists that come out, they do well with a certain sound, a certain style, a certain tempo, whatever it is, whatever aspects of their music are popular, and other artists kind of imitate that. So now I kind of look for artists that are kind of go away from that. Of course. You know what I mean? So when I start to feel like it's becoming extremely impossible, because think about it, man, our track list every week is like 50 songs. And that's with guests, with talk breaks. It's a 3-hour show every week for the last 10 years. So it's a lot of music. You know, especially at a time when people say there's no music out. I get so much music from Wednesday to Wednesday, I can't get through all of it. So there's definitely not a shortage. Now, is it all worthy of being on the show? And there's a lot of things that I play on the show that I may not listen to myself personally, but because I can appreciate the artist's endeavor and their you know, their experimentalism, I feel like it deserves a platform. But yeah, man, I'm just gonna keep going. I think guys like us, there's a renaissance happening now. People are starting to realize that they've been fed a lot of bullshit music for a long time, because through the internet, although it's been a curse in a lot of ways, one of the pros of it is they're able to access things now that they're starting to see that, like, wait a minute, like all this other stuff exists too. You know, like they've been selling us this shit for the last 20 years, and yet, so people that are in the know, that have acquired some knowledge and stayed with their ears to the street are going to be valuable again. Because everything old is new again, man. Things go full circle. People want to be able to market something as the next cool thing, and you know, like to a generation of people that didn't really experience a thing. Like we take a lot of things for granted because we were there for it. And that's the reason why the U.S. is the way it is, because it all came from here. Right. So you take some '90s hip hop group that people here think retired 30 years ago. They go to Europe, like Onyx sells out arenas, and I'm talking arenas, where you talk to, and these are people here that were fans of what they did back in the day. They just think all these artists just disappeared. You know what I mean? And listen, I'm the most jaded guy in this shit, but for me to feel this way, like there's some kind of hope, and it's only because through the show we've been exposed to people, whether it's through emails or people I meet at events or whatever, that are like, yo, you put me on to XYZ. To me, that's when I stop getting that feeling and I stop feeling like there's anything worthy of being played, I think I'll always play out, just because the whole social part of it is very appealing to me. But
Yeah.
Do it as long as until I don't want to do it, basically, you know.
I think that's our biggest payback, is getting that gratitude, you know, getting that little message from someone saying, hey, I didn't know this album existed.
Yeah.
I love it, I bought it. And you know, in what I do, I get a lot of DJs also complimenting, you know, what I'm playing, the music that I play, and to me, that's the biggest.
You know why? Because for a lot of them, and they'll never admit this, a lot of them, you're doing what they wish they could do. because they're all kind of stuck in a certain thing,
Yeah.
because it's become their bread and butter,
Yeah.
and they want to do what you do, but
Yeah.
so they live vicariously through people like us, you know.
Yeah.
So
Let me ask you this: in the hip hop world, is there a lot of jealousy? Is there a lot of DJs knocking other DJs?
are you ready for something that's a very, what do the kids say now, a hot take?
What's that?
So for years, right, there's always been this idea in hip hop that battling, competitiveness is like, it's part of the culture. DJ battles, MC battles. I always felt, even back then, that battling component was more detrimental to the culture than it was beneficial. And I'll tell you why, because it made people enemies and competitors who probably should have worked together,
Yeah.
and used those relationships. Because what happened? Cornballs got together, people with less talent and ability got together, and they put together movements, they put together record labels, they put together parties, they put together venues, and they managed to become tastemakers.
Tastemaker.
Right. Which is a huge thing that's missing now. I know DJs from back in the day that battled in the 90s that still hate each other.
Oh, wow.
Now these are guys that could have been doing a party together,
Yeah.
and I know a lot of people who never agreed with me on this in the past, who now are like musically involved themselves somehow, and they're like, you know what? It's the truth, man. I see what you were saying now. Like this whole competitive, you know, when you're involved in something that's more skill-based and talent-based, you become infatuated with technical ability. It's like when someone starts playing guitar, right? And they look at a guy like an Yngwie Malmsteen. You familiar with him?
Yep.
A zillion notes
Yep.
a second. And they're like, oh, Yngwie, all these other guys suck.
Yeah.
Jimmy Page is sloppy.
Yeah.
Then as you live a few more decades and you look back and you realize that 2 notes that Eric Clapton plays has more soulfulness and musicality than 6 Yngwie albums, right? But when you first enter into something, people's skill level is so far away from anything that you could attain, you become infatuated with it. It happens with DJs. A lot of hip hop DJs, their introduction to hip hop DJing was DMC battles.
Yeah.
So it was battle, 6-minute routine.
Yeah.
This scratch, that scratch, and they never played a venue. They have no collection. They don't know anything about music. They don't know how to put music together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they become overwhelmed with the technical prowess and they forget everything else.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what happens over time, is you start to realize that music is about feeling.
Yeah.
It's all about feeling. If it doesn't invoke feeling, then it's pointless.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
So
what? But besides that, what are some of the controversies, or what are some of the things that is keeping hip hop growing? To use your term, that underground hip hop to grow to the next stage. Would it ever go back, right? A lot of people use Bobito show, right, as the staple, as what underground hip hop was.
Strech&bobito, yeah, of course.
And how they helped and groomed some of the artists by playing their music. Like, where is that now, aside from your show and what it is that you're trying to do?
It's hard to make those comparisons now because we're living in a totally different time.
Yeah.
So to use a show like strech&bobito, who I consider friends, I was on the show. The documentary is awesome.
Yeah,
by the way,
I saw
if you
it.
haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Brought back so many memories because that was my life in the 90s. It was a different time. First of all, if you wanted to catch the show, you had to listen live.
Yeah.
There were no.
You had to stay up.
There were no, so you had to make the commitment.
That's
Again,
right.
it's about commitment.
Yeah.
How many DJs would be DJing now if they had to actually spend $500-600 a week on music
Yeah.
to stay on top of, you know,
Yeah.
and be able to do gigs? So the commitment's not the same now. Like with our show, people can always listen to the archive. They don't have to listen live.
They don't have
There's
to
a
listen
million
live.
other shows.
Yeah.
People have access to so many things now that they kind of
At their leisure.
At their leisure, that they take things for granted.
Yeah.
Social media has created this kind of like introverted, kind of socially inept generation of people,
Yeah.
whether they'll admit it or not,
Yeah.
that don't really they would rather not socialize. You know, think about it. They have unlimited access to music, movies, all this stuff in the comfort of their own home. But the most important component of all that is the social component. You know, enjoying music in a room full of people. But for us, we appreciate that because we come from that. So you have to put yourself in the mindset of people who've never experienced that. You know, so their appreciation and their understanding of that is totally different. They have no reference point. So, you know, a show like Stretch and Bob at the time, and you got to remember too, at the time, hip hop hadn't been totally infiltrated. So there was still a lot of great major label music being made. Stretch himself says it in the documentary, and I know because I was there, and I remember being in these conversations. What happened was when a lot of the underground hip hop in the 90s started, it was a lot of people who obviously didn't grow up, the artists didn't grow up with the culture, a lot of them, but they kind of embraced it because it turned into this kind of like more nerdy, kind of like less street, more intellectual. And you had people that were just making records that were just a total antithesis of everything that was on the radio. And what wound up happening, it sounds contrived, it sounds nerdy, it sounds weird for no reason. Like I go back and I have so much of that music on vinyl and I revisit it, and a lot of it didn't age well. Some of it is super like groundbreaking and like groups like Company Flow and Natural Elements. To this day you listen to their records and it's 30 years old and it's still ahead of its time. But a lot of those records at the time, it was like, all right, this is someone that made this record because it's the total opposite of Mo Money, Mo Problems. It's how many syllables, you know, we call it lyrical, spiritual, miracle music. You know, it's like that whole nerdy kind of, but, you know, at the time, it was kind of needed. That movement was needed. But again, it was a more hands-on, physical, tangible time. I mean, I know people that sold records through like Fat Beats that made great money, that bought homes, that selling 50, 60,000 copies of something on vinyl. Nowadays, it's like the music may be just as popular or maybe even more so, but how can you make money from a product that you can't sell?
Absolutely.
You know, like when I can go on YouTube and rip somebody's music off YouTube, I mean, it's tough, right? We're at this like kind of like crossroads in music where, like I said, I don't think it serves the same purpose in people's lives that it used to, because they don't have to marinate with an artist anymore. It's just this instant gratification, scroll, and I just keep scrolling till I hear something that sounds like the last song I liked. It isn't like you're forced to sit with an album
and listen through it all
and go through that musical journey from track 1 to track 15. People just don't do that anymore because there's just too much access. So there's a lot of things in the way people view music and the way they treat it that need to change. But if you don't have anybody working towards, and it can be done, but if you don't have anybody, DJs like us and people in other positions that are going to try and create that and spark that change, it's going to stay stagnant.
Absolutely.
People have to just start to understand that, you know, not everything needs an endorsement from somebody you look up to. Not everything has to have some kind of huge marketing machine. Get out there and start digging and start looking for things that, it's like with anything else, right? Like people live in echo chambers, whether it's politics, whatever. They surround themselves with people that they already agree with and ideas that they already agree with, and they start to feel like these are the only opinions, right? No one ever rarely Googles anything that's the opposite of what they believe.
That's true.
And try to come to a different conclusion. Because people don't really want to be educated, they want to be comfortable. You know, and that's really what we need to get back to more than anything, is people have to develop tastes of their own. And that's only going to come from people who are taste makers, who are not scared to take those risks. You know, I just miss a time when, like, even playing out, like you play like a certain remix or you play a version of something that maybe no one really plays a lot, and people running over and showing interest, like, yo, what remix was that, or what was that?
Do you get a lot of that?
Once in a while, it's rare. To be totally honest, just because people, like, I have a lot of remixes to like popular songs, and like producers that send us music to the show have done like, I'm not a huge Jay-Z fan, right, as an example, but I have some remixes to some Jay-Z songs that are like a whole new take on something, you know, of his that makes it much more interesting. Now, years ago, if you would have played something like that, people would run over and they'd be like, yo, who did that remix? Like, first of all, they understood that it was a remix. Like, they were just more understanding. Now, if it's not the song the way they know it, even if they hear like a familiar vocal and they kind of the brain, it doesn't really register. It's got to be the song the way they know it, the way they've heard it for decades. You know what I mean?
And even that term remix has changed completely from where exactly.
It doesn't even mean the same thing. What they've done with the remix, like back in the day, you bought a 12-inch. There were 5 different versions. The beat was different. The lyrics were different. The guests were different. So what they did now is they take the same song, excuse me, and they add the popular rapper of the week, and it's a way to resell the same song 10 times. It's the same song with a different verse. I remember buying, like, you know, Tribe singles, like Bonita Applebum. You had the Hootie mix, and, like, totally different songs. You know, like a remix was just that, a remix. Sometimes the remix became more popular than
the original.
Like, you know, Scenario remix, or Choice Is Yours remix. You know, there was musical components and concepts that we understood at one time that people just don't have the understanding of now. Like you mentioned, like jazz and all that fusion music and all that kind of stuff. I'm a huge jazz fusion fan. Even when I was in Mindcroats, like we sampled a lot of that stuff. Like we used Benny Maupin for our single. It Remains to Be Seen. I think you might have played that on your show at the time. So a lot of artists at that time weren't really using that kind of stuff, and plus we had a live bass player. Shouts to Appleseed in the group. So we you know, a lot of the bass lines were different, and you know, yeah, man, like that whole, you know, hip hop producers were accessing that music. So this whole idea of like, if it didn't come out in my generation, I can't like it. This is something foreign. This never existed before. You know, like you look at a Pete Rock, right? Who, when he made Reminisce, what was he, 20 years old? By today's standards, he's a kid, right? You know, 20 years old is right out of high school. Yet he's sampling the Tom Scott record today with, you know, he can listen to that Tom Scott. First of all, he can listen to it without prejudice. God, this is old. Like, you know what I mean? He can listen to it, appreciate something within it enough to use it. And you know what I'm saying? Like,
absolutely.
So this whole age dynamic that exists now, like, y'all had your time, this is our time. Our parents said the same thing about our music. A lot of that stuff isn't true. You know, a lot of those are cop-out arguments that people make because they just want to stay relevant and they want to just continue to, or they just don't understand themselves. Like I've gotten in, I don't have music discussions. I mean, I've been in like barbershops where the discussions are going, and I just, one of the good things about getting old is that people just discount you automatically. That old guy, he don't know. You know what I mean? Meanwhile, like half the artists they're talking about, I hung out with and know personally. You know, it's that dynamic, man. You know.
So, I mean, it's awesome to see the passion that you still have for what you're doing. I think that's something that, you know, we also feel off each other just through what we're seeing, doing, and taking part of. But what's your overall look of the future? Both, I don't want to just segregate it to hip hop or dance music, but just music in general, right? Because some of the things that I kind of tired of seeing is the whole house music. There's so much more music that's not just segregated to just house music, right? Because if I, again, could go back and talk about David Mancuso, Larry Levan, all of the greats, T. Scott, they played different music, right? And then there wasn't all four, and there wasn't all disco. It was a mix of what was coming out there. And part of the beauty about growing up in the 80s is we had a flux of everything: punk, new wave, you know, R&B, organic movements. That it was the natural thing was to incorporate that in our sets. It wasn't like, you know. So part of it, I still think that, you know, we still have a lot of homework to do when it comes to that. But for me, I just, even when now they're changing a few flyers and I see music events, you're still not representing the whole broad aspect of what the music should be. You're still sticking to it. It's just another way of kind of, you know, it's a backdoor way to kind of give people the same thing. But where do you see the status of, through social media, music, hip hop in general, and even DJing?
I think, I don't know, man. It's hard to say where it's going to go because, you know, in this digital world that we live in now, and, you know, like we mentioned earlier, the accessibility factor factors in. It takes a lot of the specialness away from a lot of things.
Are we being misrepresented as well with all of these fake DJs and anybody? Like, I see a lot of these you know, even now, like, you know, the girls looking a certain way and touching buttons and playing with over 10,000 people.
The only reason that these things are able to happen is because you have an uninformed audience. Right? So the only way to change a lot of these dynamics and a lot of these things that we've seen over the years is to have an audience that demands more and understands more. You know, like back in the day, you were offbeat, an offbeat blend or whatever, people would boo you. Listen, I've been in venues now where there's DJs I know that are making huge money to be there, and the entire night is just we used to call it sneakers in a dryer back in the day.
Oil and water.
Right. So the education has to take place, and that's the thing. Like, the only way to approach it, really, to change it, is people have to maintain integrity. You know, there has to be more people that are willing to, even if you do like some commercial stuff on the side to generate some revenue to fund your project, at least do something in another vein to kind of, because it's all about exposure. People like what they like because it's all they know. It's just that simple, right? There's you know, there's a formulaic approach to music right now, and listen, it's easy for record labels, right? But what they kind of did was they shot themselves in the foot, because now they're becoming obsolete, right? Because artists don't need them anymore, you know. But the problem is, because music's so easy to make and so accessible, everyone does it. That's why I call it the everybody does everything era. So like, you tell somebody about your show, they're telling you about their show. You know, now, but the fact that you have 3 decades worth of experience, they have 2 weeks, they talk to you like they're your peer. You know, it's part of this whole, like, everybody gets a trophy. Like, it's just a sign of the times, right? Some kid goes to Guitar Center and buys a DJ in a box thing, and now he manages to do a couple of gigs because he can. And he talks to you like, he may even think, you know, because you don't play as much as I do, that it's like, listen, there's levels to this thing. You know what I mean? Like, there's no replacement for experience. There's no replacement, and that's the thing. Like, people just, everything is so easily accessible now. They don't learn anything, and it shows when they play. Like back in the day, you wanted to look for like an original sample. You read the credits. You went out, Milt Jackson or Bob James. You start to get familiar with all these names, the instruments that they play. Now you learn about them. You see other records with some of the similar staff. Oh, CTI Records, they have a lot of the same guys. And that process is a learning curve. What happens now is people hear something in someone's set, they Shazam it, they download it, now they have it, it's in their repertoire, they don't know who it is, who made it, and it shows when they play, because you can always tell the people that are knowledgeable about what they're playing, as opposed to people who are just playing something because they're playing it. So to go back to your point, people just got to start being tastemakers again. There's too much followership. There's too much, you know, oh, I got to do this. You don't have to do anything. I remember back in the day, people coming in, like when Hal had the store, and guys that were like really, you know, diehard music heads were like, you know, I got to have this record, I got to have that. You don't have to have anything. No one put a gun to your head and say, play all this bullshit music, because you're training a generation of people. You know, there's generations of people now that have grown up on a certain style of playing. Like, I watch some of these podcasts that DJs run, and these are guys that are well known or whatever, and they're talking to other DJs, and they use all this, like, even the terminology, like floor filler and peak hour or something. Like, they accept all these things like it's the norm. I don't accept any of that terminology, because I'm from a time where none of that existed. To me, all those guys are just cornballs. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's cool to be corny now. You know, like, corny people got this because there's no rite of passage, right? There's no such thing as, I'm sure you've heard guys use this terminology, like, oh, it's the beginning of the night song, or this is a peak hour or something. Listen, we all know you got to read the crowd. That's common sense, depending on what you're trying to do. This is why, and I know this sounds crazy coming from a DJ, I don't want to be responsible for people's dancing anymore.
Wow. Okay.
I would rather play in places that there is no dancing, because dancing nowadays, unfortunately, has become equated to a certain style of music. Right. And there's no justification for it, because people that listen to all this trap stuff, it's like 70-something beats per minute. Like, at one time, all that music would have been considered undanceable. Right. But because it's the popular thing, play something I can dance to translates to play something I know. That's what it translates. That's their way of saying, I don't know what this is, so I can't dance to it.
Absolutely.
That's all it is. That's just, there's code you have to understand when it comes from patrons.
Yeah.
You know, play something I can dance to means play something I know.
Yeah.
Or, you know, when they ask you, like, what else do you have? They're not there to follow you on a musical journey.
That's right.
Because a lot of people, they've never been exposed to that.
Even that term, musical journey, has taken such a diluted meaning to it.
Yeah.
People just say it because they want to kind of put themselves in this, oh yeah, I'm different, when in reality you'll go hear the same thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of what, you know,
where we are.
It's kind of where we are.
Yeah.
You know, and to try to get people to understand anything other is tough because they've never seen anything else.
Yeah.
You know?
We were so fortunate.
We were. But you know what? It made us who we are.
Yeah.
I wouldn't care as much now if I would have came up maybe 15, 20 years later under a different model.
Yeah, that's true.
Under a different, so I'm glad that we were able to experience what we did and still be ahead of the game now and apply it. Like, look, I could sit here and I could do a gig and play 10 hours straight of brand new hip hop that no one in the venue probably has ever heard of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not like to toot my own horn or be like, oh, look what I got that you don't have. It's just because I have no choice but to be totally engulfed in this because I got to do a 3-hour show every week.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to present it to people that I know are tuning in for that specific reason.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. Like when you're doing something where you're just trying to appease patrons, it's tough because they expect a formula. That's why they're there.
They do.
That's why you have to carve out your own thing, and it's not easy. It's tough, but if you can manage to do it, then you get people that are coming because of what you do.
For the value of the show.
The value of the actual event.
And what you're representing.
Right.
That's awesome. Chris, I can't thank you enough, but give us all the details where they can see you, where they can hear you, where they can follow you.
So my radio show is Flip the Script Radio. Our website is flipthescriptradio.org. There's links to our archives and our YouTube channel. We have a full YouTube channel of freestyles, interviews, lots of legendary guests, lots of we have producers, you know, getting busy live. I mean, the YouTube channel is really like a hidden gem. Our archives are on Mixcloud. The show is live on Mixler every Wednesday from 8 to 11. That's if you want to listen to the live show. You can join our live chat.
Yep.
We have a chat that runs while we're on the air. We've had people link up from all over the globe and actually do albums through our chat.
Oh, that's awesome.
Producers that met MCs and like all kinds of stuff. And then weekly, if you're in the tri-state area, I'm at the Moonshine Modern Supper Club every Wednesday. I'm so used to shouting out the show. Every Saturday from 10 to 2, and it's a free party, no dress code, no cover. It's a chill spot, like a bar lounge kind of restaurant kind of vibe. It's not a club.
Right.
It's just a place to hang out and hear some
great music,
some dope shit, and just kind of like a good vibe. I'm doing it for like 6 years, so it's a great vibe. And that's it, man. I'm just happy you reached out. Nobody looks for guys like us anymore.
No, I mean, I could tell the passion, like I said, and I think we've always had a really good vibe of each other, what we've been doing, what we've been trying to promote, our movement, a lot of respect, you know, and even though, and this is the beauty about it, even though we may not talk every single day, but we see what we do, and that's the respect of coming together, you know, under that whole umbrella of just great music. So thank you again, Chris. Wishing you luck, a lot of success for your radio show, Flip the Script. Make sure you follow him. Make sure you just take a little bit of interest, because that's part of also growing and getting yourself educated. You know,
I always say that for people like hip hop heads that kind of gave up on this music a long time ago because they feel like it's gone a certain way, and I understand that. Or if you're just out of the loop and you want to kind of get reconnected, the show is a great way because we put it all in a nice little convenient package and serve it up. We do all the legwork and all the digging and so all you got to do is tune in or listen to the archives. The live experience to me is the best because you can talk to people in the chat, but even still, you know, it's a great way to get re-tuned back in if you've been out of the loop. So,
and for all of my fans out there, I want to thank you. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I'm on Thursdays live on Twitch, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Thank you. We also have a gig coming up. If you're interested, you can go onto my website, Alvaro MRX Jimenez. Look at all the details. It's September 29th, a Sunday, where we just expand your mind musically. That's all that we want to really do, is just you know, Keith and myself really have a vast majority of great music that you will come out and enjoy. So thank you once again for tuning in, and hope to see you guys very soon. Before we forget, I want to thank Lidio's Cafe and Flowers right here on Westfield Avenue in Roselle Park, New Jersey.
Great spot.
Great coffee, great chill area. They also make flowers. If you want to get your loved one a flower.
They even let guys like me in a place. It's incredible.
And they rent out the place. So if you're interested, Lidio's Cafe and Flowers, come out, check it out, and thank you guys, and see you guys very soon.